We have, in the back of the first chapter is an overview of turbines. And then the exhaust chapter has part 1 turbines, inlets, part 1 turbines, fuel, cooling. So almost every chapter there's a section on recips, a section on turbines, so I have that all tabbed. If you're interested in having yours, you can come look at mine. Don't feel you have to unless it helps you out for class. So today's lecture will be chapter 1, and the turbines is page 36 to 61 in there. And then there are 2 really helpful books in the Google Drive under maintenance publication resources. The Glencoe Aircraft Gas Turbine Engine Technology and entire book on turbines. A lot of the information I have in this all these lectures comes from that. So if you want to dive deeper into it, feel free to do that. And then the Jeppesen, I may refer to that as needed. I like how they explain things better sometimes than the ASA book, so I'll try to let you know when that happens. So objective today is to understand turbine theory, types of turbines, and some really fun history. I'll do the history first. And then, I forgot the theory. Okay. Can't start turbine class without a turbine startup. So here is my favorite. Does anybody have any clue what kind of engine this could be? So I hope this plays about as see. But when I listen to this, I love it because I hear the igniters firing. I hear the fuel nozzles kicking in, and then I hear secondary fuel nozzles kicking in, and then I hear prop going to feather. You might not be able to differentiate that probably yet, which is perfectly fine. So just enjoy the music. I'll hopefully not add.
Voting absentee in Michigan is now safe and secure. Go to mi.vote to request your absentee ballot. Track your ballot online and see when it is received. Learn more at mi.vote.
All right. What do you think that tick, 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 tick is? Yeah! Okay, we gotta go back a little bit. Obviously. What was that noise? We were like, wait, I heard it. Fuel, yeah. Light the fires. super important. Don't be goofing off. Don't be checking marketplace. This is foundational. Anchor can knock you with a stick. He sees you.
Well, she hit the phrase right on the head. This is foundational. So back in physics, I believe.
Yes.
And you learned about different ducts. So can anyone tell me if the airflow is from left to right, what kind of duct this is? Converging? Anybody else have a different? Are we all happy with converging? You guys are not confident. I love it. Okay, converging. Well, you're absolutely right. The airflow is converging down into a smaller area. And then if this is a convergent duct, what would this duct be? Divergent, because now you're taking the airflow and you're diverging it out, you're expanding it out. Converging, you're putting it together into a smaller area. This is going to be so foundational. Now, one of the other things too is that whenever you see an illustration in the book, a picture of a jet engine or an illustration of an aircraft, if you notice, the orientation of the engine or the aircraft is usually always pointing to the left, which means the airflow is coming from left to right. So as images of engines are put up here, just remember that you can identify the convergent divergent duct by the airflow. Because if I reverse the airflow through this duct, it's not a convergent duct anymore, is it? It's a divergent duct. So you might see various things where we go through an engine and we're looking at it backwards. So you have to understand which way is the airflow going into the duct, which is going to make it either a convergent or a divergent. So most of the stuff we see in our books, or when we go through an aircraft, notice that this is the front of the engine, so airflow is going this way. Just remember that. That really helps. The other thing on the next slide, I believe, this is how I learned to remember it a long time ago, is the C. If you take the large area, put a C in here, that's convergent. And if you draw the same thing back here, it's like part of a D, and that's a divergent. That's just one of the little things that I did many years ago to remember convergent, divergent duct based on the airflow going through the duct. Okay? That is foundational. Now, if you don't learn anything else, just remember this, because when we go through our orals, which I'm also going to be doing it pre-oral, I'm going to be out there in lab at times. I'm going to grab small groups, and we're going to go over an engine, and I'll ask you airflow, explain the compression, explain the velocity, explain the temperature. Everything is based on this. Everything. This whole engine is based on convergent and divergent ducts. That's why I want to hammer home how foundational this is. What else do we have?
Oh, we have the air hose and.
Yeah. Now, when we start looking at a convergent duct, let's take a look at a water nozzle and a hose. This is a typical water nozzle. So if you didn't have the water nozzle on and all you had was this opening and you turn your water hose on, what happens to the water? How far does it shoot out of the hose? Not very far. It just kind of comes out. But then you screw that nozzle on and make it a convergent duct, what happens to the water? It shoots right out there, doesn't it? So let me ask you this. This is going to be a confusing question. So when I put this convergent duct on the front of that and change that into a velocity, does the pressure go up? Now it's shooting real far, so does the pressure go up? No, it doesn't. The pressure measured is actually going down. What you're seeing is the velocity impact, which can fool you that there's more pressure, but it's not. It's the velocity impact you're feeling and shooting it out there. But Bernoulli's principle says that when we have an increase of velocity, we get a decrease of pressure. And when we get a decrease of velocity, get an increase of pressure. So it could sound like it's counterintuitive, but that's the way it is. That's how you're going to be tested on it. Yes, sir.
Does the volume of air or water moving through change?
Not necessarily, no. Sometimes you can choke it where you would change the volume, but within a range, the same amount of volume is going through. It's just shooting out faster and a higher velocity at that impact velocity. But you can choke it down to where you're now throttling it, so you're getting less. Because you can throttle it to the point where it's not flowing at all, right? So, but for the most part, we're just changing it. And there will be some changes, and we'll have charts as Christina moves on further. We're gonna have some cool charts to show you what happens at the beginning of the compressor, then the combustion, and the turbine, and then the exhaust. We're gonna show you what pressure does. We're gonna show you what velocity does. And we're gonna show you what temperature does. Those are the main things that we're gonna be dealing with. Any questions on this so far? I wanna make sure I draw a good picture in your head, so that it's foundational as we move forward. Anything you wanna add?
No, other than, I think I talked about it later, but with velocity increasing, pressure decreasing, you're gonna have a lot of exchanges going on with energy. Like, you can't have everything. You can't have velocity and pressure. You're exchanging one for the other as you go through an engine. And you're gonna see that when we get more into how the turbine actually operates. That do we want to increase pressure? Okay, I'm gonna sacrifice velocity, or the other way around. And that's how the engineering principles went into designing these engines. But yeah.
Now, there is sometimes little caveats to that, is when we want to increase the mass airflow through an engine, we can do that. It's amazing how you can trick, especially in the compressor section, we're gonna see this. When we deal with axial flow compressors, you'll learn what that is. That you'll see that we're actually exchanging the pressures. We're going velocity to pressure, and we're actually boosting the pressure at the outlet because of the whole shape of the compressor. So we're increasing the mass airflow through there. It's really pretty cool, kind of scientific, but when we get into all the advanced formulas for you to figure out thrust and velocity, it'll make more sense. I'm just kidding. You don't have to do it.
I'm having fun watching their faces.
Yeah. No, but it'll make sense. We're gonna draw such good pictorial and walk you through this that you're gonna go, I get it. And that's why usually everybody does really well in their finals, in their orals and stuff when it comes to jet engines, turbine engines. Yeah, what's the next one?
So then, what happens if all that we were talking about was what type of airflow? Subsonic or supersonic? Subsonic.
Subsonic, good question.
So what happens when we go supersonic?
That's exactly the same.
Everything is now opposite.
Can you go back?
Yes.
Let's put these two ducts together and then have supersonic flow coming into one of these. Now go to the next slide. Who here watched the Artemis rocket launch? Wasn't that cool? Okay, those engines are old engines. Those were the engines that were used on the space shuttle from how many years ago? From the 80s and stuff, They were just such good engines. And they burn hydrogen and oxygen type fuels. So what we do is that those jet engines, when you generate the pumps that mix the hydrogen and oxygen, and you bring it into this convergent section, you have what they call, this is a CD duct. So they're together. But when you have this energy coming through here, and you're converging it to the point where you reach the speed of sound right here in this rocket nozzle. I'm going to call it a rocket nozzle. Once you got this throat with all this energy just being packed in here from that tremendous combustion, and it goes through here, now you're going to go through a divergent duct, but because you're dealing with supersonic velocities, everything you get an increase of velocity, and you get a decrease of pressure. So supersonic airflow, it's flipped. Subsonic airflow that we deal with on turbine engines, jet engines, things like this, is gonna be like we said. Convergent duct is gonna increase velocity, divergent duct is gonna decrease the velocity, increase the pressure. Rocket engines, supersonic, it's just the opposite. Just the way it is. Any questions?
Okay. This next one is the super cool, where I get really excited. I mean, this stuff is exciting. This is foundational. But make sure you have airflow through ducts cemented in your head, because here is beautiful example of a turbine engine. Look what's happening. What is happening in this overall section? What kind of duct? Convergent. What is happening in that? Divergent. What is happening here?
No.
Right here. Convergent. What is happening right here? What is happening here? What is happening here? What is happening here? And that's big overall picture. In these, what are called stator vanes, there's they are like little divergent ducts in this whole convergent section, and there's a whole lot more of that going on. So if you don't understand how ducts work, you are going to be completely confused the entire class. But it's very simple, and I think you guys got it.
We're gonna try to confuse you.
Oh yeah.
No, but what you're gonna get out of that is you're gonna go, I get it. It's really that simple. It makes sense. So one of the things that Christina mentioned right through here is we have all these different C's and D's, but each stage of compressor stator blades and compressor rotor blades, a compressor rotor and a compressor stator make up a stage, those two together. You're gonna see that the rotor is gonna actually increase the velocity to the stator, and the stator is now gonna change it to pressure. And then velocity, pressure, at the whole time, we're packing it in and creating a high compression ratio over here. And the compression ratio coming out of here is so high, there's such a high compression here of air, that's very hot, 400, 500 degrees, give or take. It's very hot. So that compressor is imparting a tremendous amount of energy into the air to get it compressed for the combustion section. And it's all little convergent, divergent ducts, even in between the individual blades. Gotta love CDs.
So here's a question for you. I think you're going to be able to answer a question on the final right now based on the information you have so far. So exactly what Kirk said, building compression, more pressure, right before it goes into the combustion or burner section. What kind of duct is that? Divergent. So from here to here, what's happening with our pressure? Increasing. Bam! The entrance to the burner, also the exit of the compressor, also called diffuser. We're going to go over this many, many times. This is the point of highest pressure in a turbine engine. You must know that.
Period.
So
Now,
important that you know that.
and here, and be very careful, when we talk about the diffuser right here, the highest point of pressure in a turbine engine, that is not the combustion section. That's just this area before it hits the flame. Okay? Now, because it supports this combustion chamber, these combustion chambers are also called burners. Think of it as like a gas grill. You turn your gas grill on, you have these burners. Well, there's going to be words used So this is a burner. They can call this pressure here in the diffuser burner pressure. It's the pressure for the burner. It's not the burner. The burner pressure is not this of what's coming out. That is not burner pressure. It could be called burner pressure as part of the diffuser, the highest point of pressure in the jet engine. So it could get confusing, but we're gonna tell you this right at the very beginning. So as we walk through the whole lecture and learning about turbines, it'll become clearer and clearer. We'll make sure we point those things out so you hear it over and over again and it'll make sense. So we just wanted to point that out. Most important thing to remember is this section right here is the highest, called the diffuser, is the highest point of pressure in a turbine engine.
What's the, like, what pressure is that?
That'll depend on your engine. You mean like how many PSI?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it essentially use like compression efficient?
Yes, and we're gonna talk about that a little bit later, yes. We absolutely.
Join.
Oh, yeah, I'll steal it if I do. The other thing on this slide is there are 3 sections common to every single turbine. And we've been talking about them, but that is your compression section that has the compressors. And then the combustion chambers where we introduce fuel and have the igniters and the burning combustion is happening. And then the turbine, which is, so we have all this hot air, like I'm giving you right now, coming out in major expansion from our combustion. The turbine is extracting that energy and turning it into useful mechanical energy to drive the compressor. So compression, combustion, turbine, know those 3.
Those 3 are gonna be common in every turbine engine, whether it's a jet engine, a turboprop engine, whatever it may be, that uses a turbine. So those 3 are gonna be, that's a test question too, you're gonna see that. But those 3 are applicable to every turbine engine, yes.
Sorry, I had a question going back to the highest point of pressure.
Yes,
for
the
an engine.
diffuser section.
The diffuser section, right. So why is that higher pressure than in the middle section there where the flame happens? In my mind, that explosion would be, make it even higher pressure.
That's really, yeah, I love that question because that's one of the things that we have to wrap our mind around. If we had higher pressure here than here, where do you think the pressure would go then?
Right, it would force it out backwards.
Yes. Which can happen, and they call that a compressor stall, compressor surge, where you get the air coming through here stalls like a wing of an aircraft, and now the combustion goes backwards through the compressor and then shoots 20 feet out of the front of the jet engine and scares the bejesus out of you. And I've witnessed it. I've seen it firsthand. It's not a fun thing. So you gotta have higher pressure here than here. So once we have this combustion is accelerating the air to the back and turning it into velocity, so this will actually be a lower pressure than here. That's why we say the diffuser is the highest point of pressure. We're allowing this combustion to escape. If we choked it or capped it, then obviously it's gonna cause problems. Good question. Anybody else? Hanging in there? Yeah, here's one.
So, while it's running, it's, the actual turbine section is effectively powering the compression stage.
Correct.
Is the starter then attached to the turbine section?
It's, so well, it would depend on the engine.
It would depend on the engine, but no, you're absolutely right. What we're gonna get into later is there are gonna be different types of jet engines, and the most common jet engine out there is a split spool. So if you can imagine this cut in half, these fan blades right here, let's say for instance, that is one spool, and that would be on a separate shaft going through here to the last turbine, or 2 or 3. And then the turbines here would be on a shaft that goes to this section of the compressor. This is what they call the N1, N2. That core compressor is what's attached to the gearbox, which is attached to the starter and things like that. So yes, you're basically going to be turning the compressor and the turbine, the whole mechanical thing. The starter will turn that whole thing to get the airflow going. Yes, sir.
You're probably gonna get to this, with the reciprocating engine, like with the turbocharger, it makes sense to use the exhaust gases, because we're just gonna waste those.
Right.
But with this, the exhaust is part of our propulsion, so why are we recycling?
Oh, well, we have to be able to power the engine itself, to turn the compressor, turn the accessories, drive the hydraulic pump. We have to be able to tap mechanical energy off of this, right? So once we accelerate the gases and shoot it backward, well, that works for a rocket engine because they don't have turbines, they just, right? Well, we have to drive the compressor, so what we do is we put these windmills in here, right? Put a windmill up there, capture the wind, mechanical energy to turn a mill or pump water, right? So we're putting turbines in here to extract the energy to drive the compressor. That's the way it's self-sustaining. It keeps it working. Yes?
Are you gonna get into ramjets and stuff?
Yeah. Yep. Yes?
So having the turbines there, is that increasing the cost or efficiency slightly?
Actually, these have, yes. Yes, because the turbines are extracting energy in order to drive itself, to drive the engine. So we are getting an energy extraction out of here. What's left is the jet exhaust that pushes the aircraft forward. So what we have here is every turbine blade and, or from every stator blade and turbine blade, see this is a stator here, and this is the rotor, turbine blade that rotates, this is a stator rotor. Each one of those are convergent divergent ducts. Extracting, changing it to velocity, changing it to pressure, going back into velocity. So the result we have is the best velocity we have coming out of the jet pipe. Yes, those turbines are extracting energy, and then what's left is our thrust for the engine.
Amazing that it just blows my mind. Like there's enough energy that.
That's why turbine engines are cool. Just the amount of power that they generate is really neat.
How come they generate so much power though? Like compared to reciprocating, like because there's still compression happening in reciprocating.
Mhm.
Is it just because there's two? I don't know. Are we gonna get? I just want to understand how it's producing so much power.
Yeah, and what you're going to see is that when you get into piston engines, which I don't think they're in yet, right?
Right.
When you get into piston engines, we're going to talk about the different cycles. This here, the jet engine, the turbine engine, is called the Brayton cycle. It's a continuous pressure cycle. The Brayton cycle is called a continuous pressure cycle. When we go through the charts, you're going to see that the pressures through the engine are almost constant. There's a lot of changes that take place into velocity and things like this, especially in here. The pressure will go up here, and then it stays relatively constant and drops a little bit here for the velocity. But the Brayton cycle is called a constant pressure cycle. And because it's continuous, it creates a tremendous amount of energy, especially with all the fuel you dump into it and stuff like this. On the piston engine, you're going to learn that that's an Otto cycle. You have a piston that comes up, compresses the air, there's fuel, spark plug, and then you have a little combustion, and then it pushes the piston down into mechanical energy. That's called the Otto cycle. You can only create so much energy. This thing, because of the space involved, you can create a lot of energy, and you go through a lot of fuel too.
And there's no ignition.
There's a what?
There's no we'll learn how the combustion chamber what's happening in that.
Yes, you'll learn that in the piston engine. And this here, once you get it lit, it's going to be just like a gas grill. Once you get these burners lit, it just stays lit. So you don't need the igniters anymore.
There is an initial ignition.
Yes, there is. you hear those snapping in the video. You hear the, and then it lights off, and then after it comes up to idle, the igniters just turn off. You don't need them anymore. It just burns. As long as you give it fuel, it burns.
For the compression section, you've got all those, vanes
Yeah.
in there. Do they change pitch at all to vary the compression?
Some do. Some jet engines do. They're called variable compressor blades. Variable vanes, actually. The rotors would never change pitch, but the stators here that come up in between the rotating compressor, there's some jet engines and some various stages, those will change pitch.
Well, I was thinking for like the jets that go like Mach 1, 2, 3, whatever, and you're switching, you can change the pitch of those.
Well, they'll change the pitch even on a subsonic engine. When we get into supersonic engines, the only thing that changes is that we still have subsonic air coming through the engine. So if you got a fighter jet that's going Mach 2, we still have subsonic air coming into the engine because the compressor wouldn't be able to handle supersonic air. There'd be too many shock waves going through the compressor of the engine. It would just mess everything up. Yes.
What about the supersonic compression engine?
That's different. It's not a turbine engine. Okay, that's not a turbine. So it doesn't have a compressor, rotating turbines.
Well, you said we're gonna get into ramjets, which don't.
We're gonna talk about ramjets, but all that is one great big combustion chamber.
Right, so,
That's all it is. Kind of like a little mini rocket engine, right? You're just dumping fuel in there, igniting it, and blast out the back. So it's not a turbine engine. We're just gonna stick with this turbine technology. And we're not even gonna get into the ramjets and pulse jets that much. We're gonna touch on the theory, but then it's gonna be all about turbines. Yes, there was another one over here. Yeah.
so the way we harvest power in this engine would be like through the crankshaft. Does this have like a crankshaft connected to the exhaust side of the turbine?
Well, take that back. We can talk PT6s, we can
Right.
talk helicopter engines. This engine here is a turbine engine, but it's a jet engine. So when we talk about this, it's a turbine engine, but it's a turboprop because we're gonna have a propeller on here. So now we're extracting a mechanical energy to turn something. This could also be used to turn a transmission that'll turn rotor blades in a helicopter. Okay, so we're not depending on jet thrust, we're changing it into mechanical energy to a propeller or rotor. Hope that helps.
I know it'd be connected like part of an extension of the compressor or a gearbox or something.
Yeah, like up here.
So this one uses flux.
See, I'm turning those turbine blades right now by turning this prop up. Okay? And we'll get into that. We're gonna learn all those little details, especially her, because I love the fact that she went through PT6 school. So she has, and everything that she learned about PT6s is applicable to pretty much all turbine engines. So it's really good. Anyone else? Good questions. I'm glad you guys are trying to wrap your mind around this because this is foundational for everything that we're gonna talk about. So the three: compression, combustion, and turbines. And turbines extract energy to drive the shaft to turn the compressor. And accessories on the gearbox.
No more questions for the moment?
Are they gonna run the jet?
Yes, that is the hope and plan.
Okay. Unfortunately, we can't go up to high power with the jet. I think one of the engines we can. Pretty
Yeah, I think
close.
so.
Take it up to like 90%.
Let's see what
Yeah.
Ryan wants to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, but the other one, you'll basically take it up to idle. I think we can take it up to 70, 75%. And don't go over anything more than that. But you'll feel the power, you'll see
Yeah.
the thrust. Yes.
So in the turbine section, I can see the 3 rows of fan blades. What's the short?
Stop. Those are 3 rows of turbine blades?
Perfect.
Or are you talking about up there?
In the back, in the turbine section?
Yeah, those are turbine blades.
Yeah, so the little, I'm just trying to picture in between them. Are those like little?
Yes, yep, these do not rotate. stator. They're stationary. So that's part of the stages between these two, is that the air is actually changing velocity, or pressure into velocity, and the pressure into velocity back into pressure, and then velocity, and then right out the back. So we're going to talk about the individual stages of the compressor, rotor stator, and the individual stators of the turbine, rotor stator. I should say rotor stator, stator rotor. It's backwards back here. And you'll see how all the pressure and velocity changes through each, even the spacing between each little blade on a turbine disc is, it's either convergent ducts back here, divergent ducts up there. Good questions. I'm glad, because this is so foundational to start wrapping your mind about how this works.
So in the exhaust, it ends with the converging, which is right. So then you're speeding up the air. There's less pressure.
There's less pressure measured here, but you're speeding up the air for velocity. Yes.
Well, like, maybe I don't understand the physics of that. No, not maybe. I don't understand the physics of that. Like, to me, like, when I think of pressure, I would think like, oh, you're getting like a bigger punch or something, or like you're able to push against something better. Whereas like if you're just going fast, there's no pressure behind that. It just doesn't seem like it's gonna like go anywhere. I don't really get how velocity works.
The balloon.
Yes.
We've all done this as we were kids, right?
Someone with large lung capacity. And then pinch it off when you're.
Yeah, and then wait before you release it.
We're not saying you're full on air.
Beautiful.
That's good.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so what you got, right, is you have all of this potential energy right now, just waiting to do something, right? And then it's gonna go through a small nozzle, so it's gonna convert the pressure into velocity. What happens when pressure is converted into velocity?
What do you think will happen?
That's a jet. So you're taking all that potential energy right here, and now you're gonna blast it through that tailpipe, and that resulting, Newton's law, for every action there's an opposite and equal reaction. So as we shoot that jet exhaust out the back, it's gonna push the aircraft forward.
I guess that's what I'm getting confused, because Newton's law is like, yeah, because there's an equal and opposite reaction, but if you're, like, molecules, like, I don't know, I'm just thinking like you're pushing against air, so wouldn't you want to push with more force, like, not just faster?
Well, we are. There's a lot of energy when we talk about force. Force is area times pressure. If you remember your physics, the force is area times pressure. So we can engineer an engine to have so much area in here and so much pressure, and that's energy. That's that balloon. It's energy. And now we're just shooting it through a jet nozzle to push the aircraft forward.
So would it be fair to think of pressure as more as like potential energy?
Yep.
than
Yes.
kinetic?
Yes. And what's the velocity then when it escapes the balloon? Kinetic energy. There you go. Perfect. I love it. Yes.
So when we control the jet engine, we're just controlling the fuel?
Yep. That's all it is. And some engines, you'll see it later on, some engines, as you're controlling the fuel, which is controlling the speed of the engine, some engines may have little variable stator to help make sure the airflow is correct coming through the compressor. I'll tell you right now, a turbine engine, especially a jet engine, turbine engines are designed to run at full power. They're designed to run at full power. When you got that throttle all the way up there and that engine is just roaring and you're pushing out how many thousands of pounds of thrust out of the back of that thing. Everything is designed to run then. To run less than full power, we have to do things to the engine to make sure it doesn't blow itself out. I mean, there's times where you can start throttling back and coming into a mid-range, and you could be making so much pressure here in this combustor that you're actually blowing the flame out. And you can just extinguish the flame because there's so much pressure coming through here. So it's designed to run at full power. Anything less than that, what we do is we'll have bleed valves in here that'll actually bleed off some of that compression so you don't blow that flame out the back. And that happens at the lesser throttle settings. You'll learn that too, about those bleed valves. Yep, so a jet engine's designed to run at full power. And everything is designed to run about, what's the idle of a PT6?
I don't know, I don't see 50, 55.
55. So when it comes to jet engines, we talk about percentage of RPM, so they're percentages. So on a typical jet engine, let's say you start it and it gets to idle, it's already running at approximately 55% of what it could do. That's idle. Could be 52%, could be 56%, whatever the manufacturer is that finds it's idle. So that idle is its self-sustaining speed. So if you started a jet engine and you're starting it off from 0, you're going up to 5%, 10%, 50%. If you stopped it at 25%, it's not going enough to self-sustain. It'll fizzle out and go the other way. And if it's still flowing fuel, you're going to get a hot start and all this other stuff. So you have to get it up to a self-sustaining speed. That's called idle. And typically it's right around, give or take, 55% of what it could do. And we always talk about full power as right around 100%. That's the max. So 50 to 55% is idle speed. And the bleed valves are open to bleed off all of that compressed air because these are so efficient that we have to make sure we have enough just to support combustion and do what we need to do. But as we advance the throttle, we're going to make more and more thrust. And you're going to also learn, I love it saying that, we're going to also learn that as you advance the throttle and you start adding fuel, you're going to get more thrust. But you're also going to learn, this is a test question too, that when you start getting up close to full power, let's say you get up to 90%, and you're pushing some pretty good thrust out of that back engine, out of the back of the engine, just small throttle changes, just a little bit more fuel gives you a large increase in thrust. Give it a little bit more fuel, large increase of thrust, right toward that end. So small throttle movements gives you large increases of thrust. So we can take that engine up to like 92% and you're roaring pretty good. Yeah, you take it up to 99%. You'll see how it's roaring then. You get a tremendous amount of power out of it. But the percentage is based on RPM. But you get a tremendous amount of thrust toward those higher power settings. That's a test question too. That's good. That's part of understanding it. Because that way the bleed valves are closing. Now we're getting maximum air flowing through here to support combustion, and we get a maximum amount of thrust out of the back of that thing. And if you ever get around a jet engine that's running at full power, you can sneak back there and take pop cans and throw it in the exhaust and see how far they go. There's a story there, but I don't need it. Okay, anything else on this? Oh yeah, one more. There is one more. So everything up to this point, right up to the diffuser, is called the cold section. And everything starting with combustion right there in the burner can where the actual flame starts, right in here, going back, is called the hot section. Nothing too difficult about that.
Did you say that the diffuser is the part of the hot section or cold?
the diffuser,
Yeah.
it's part of the cold section, even though it's hot. That air right there, it's not part of combustion, all it is compressed air. But that compressed air is hot. You don't wanna burn yourself on a leak coming out of there, it's pretty hot. I think what we're pushing anywhere from 550 degree, 550 degrees. That compressed air is so hot, yeah. Typically, this is like a diesel engine, you're getting like on an average of like 21 to 1 compression ratio. You know, not like a piston engine where it might be 8.5 to 1 or 10 to 1 if it's more high performance. Diesels are like 19-20% to 1 compression ratio. This is like a diesel, so you get a high compression ratio on here. You'll learn that as you go through too. Are we looking? Okay, so I want to mention cold section, hot section. Anything else you want to add to it?
Yeah, that covered all my notes.
Okay.
Ready for a break?
This is fun, ain't it?
All right, so before you go for your break, you can think about this. What does a squid have to do with it?
Let's go back to the previous slide.
Yeah. Come back.
No, the squids.
Oh, no. Come back at 57.
So I did switch the right cell fuel cap gas back in November. Did not change the left one. So I changed it today at lunch. So they're both good. The right side had a lot of water and a lot of junk in it. Ironically, they had the new gasket or the new O-ring. The left one wasn't sumping as well. It wasn't like a steady stream.
Yeah.
And there wasn't anything in it. There was like a couple of drops of water in it.
That's
So with a bad O-ring had less, and a good O-ring had way more. So anyway, so
I wonder if there's another leak in it somewhere.
maybe. Could be.
Yeah, but that's been the history of it. Like,
Okay.
right, good. Nasty.
Nasty.
Left it.
I don't remember something the right after I swapped the O-ring back in the fall.
Okay.
So it could have just been in
That
there from
would
November.
make sense.
But anyway,
That makes
do you want this or are you good?
I don't know.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Like the benefits of it, like you get so much more force out of it.
That's why engineering goes into these jet engines to where if you can run hotter, you can make a more efficient engine. So that get into advanced ceramics and the turbines and hot sections and stuff like this, so they can run it hotter. Now we're extracting more energy out of it. Yeah, there's a cost benefit for, I should say there's a cost for, you know, the way they operate. Yeah. These use a lot of fuel. You're dumping a lot of fuel in those nozzles. It's measured in pounds per hour.
So with this stators between here, making sure I'm understanding what's going on. So we're compressing the air, but to keep it from coming forward, we start diverging to accelerate it so that the flow continues to go this direction.
Yes, yes,
right?
yeah. And what we're doing is any air coming in, what we're gonna do is we're gonna change it into velocity
Yep.
to impinge on the stator, and the stator's gonna change it into a pressure rise. And then that pressure coming out is gonna go into the next compressor, which is gonna change it to velocity, and go into the next stator and change it to a pressure rise. Then the pressure rise is actually gonna go higher pressure but lower velocity. So, in the design, let's throw it into a convergent job. So that we're getting a pressure rise, but we're also keeping the flow going.
Yeah, so we're converging and diverging at the same time.
Almost. Yeah, right next to each other.
So we're building compression without losing velocity.
We're actually
Gaining a little bit of velocity. It's crazy.
but we're getting a tremendous amount of energy.
Yeah.
And that energy is right here in the difference. Pressure.
Thanks, Christina.
That balloon is right there. And then it just through here to support combustion.
Right.
And then that expansion is just allowed to shoot aft. And it's not choked too much. It's just enough engineered to get maximum velocity coming out of the burn to start impinging on the turbine blades, impinging on the stator blades, I should say, because it'll always hit the stator before it hits the rotor. This is always different. Up here, you always have a rotor and a stator. Back here, you have a stator and a rotor. That's a stage. It's the opposite. So yeah, now we're starting to change it into a velocity, but
Is your DC3
we're also
DC6
putting it into
converted or
a divergence.
Right.
Isn't that weird?
It's crazy.
It's cool. And then
All of ours
you have all
are
this pressure
converted
now.
to PT6s.
This velocity is now
Two
being
of them
changed to
have the
pressure
6.5 ARs.
for the final
and
tailpipe.
The third one has
Tailpipe's
6.7s.
not actually on here. The tailpipe will come
they're
down
better?
into like a convergent duct.
The
Now you got that
6.7s?
final
No, the
push, a final
turbine
velocity.
Yeah.
going on
The
back
turbine
end.
engines
So,
are much
I
more
noticed
efficient and they're
turbine
more
section
reliable to
on all the
operate.
Okay.
And
turbines
way
I've looked at
easier to
is
find
smaller than the
parts.
compression section.
With the radials, we could plan
Yeah.
Is that
on
generally true?
I would say
unplanned
it's
overnight.
generally
So,
true.
That
Yeah.
you
I'm
basically
thinking the
carry
reason why that would be is
all your extra
because
parts
for
and
every
an
full
extra
rotation, you're
cylinder
gonna get
that-
slightly more
Several
compression.
engine failures.
You're gonna get more
even a
air
total engine
compressing so that
failure
your
on-
turbine then
Okay.
Yeah,
gets
one of
accelerated
Dad's
until you
flights.
can't harness enough air.
So they're
Well,
to-
But
one thing
you
you wanna
can fly
remember
on one
is that
engine
turbines
pretty good
Yep.
are connected
on
mechanically.
the
Right.
DC3. We haven't had
Honda
any
jet.
engine
So we're-
failures
so
with
So
our
they're always
compressing
turning at the
air.
same, yes.
and we've been running
which
them
is
since
increasing,
2003.
because once we combust that,
They're just
that's
better.
increasing the speed
Yeah.
of our turbine section, which
They're-
in turn increases the speed of the compressor
Yes.
section,
That's
so it's,
cool.
it's
Against
building,
Mr.
building,
Allen,
building until you can't get enough air to accelerate
What he
anymore.
says,
Okay.
Exactly.
they've been in the long
Because
run just
you're
cheaper
accelerating so much air and
for
you're
our
combusting
operation than the
that,
radials.
Right.
that the result of
Radials
what's
just
coming
hard to
out
find
is
the
a
parts
tremendous
and
amount
the
of
expenses in getting
But the
trapped
RPMs are
somewhere
going up.
overnight.
Yeah. Goes up enough
Having
enough
to fly
until you
another
can't
plane
get
with the
enough air in
parts.
to go anymore.
Having
Yeah,
to
well,
make the parts
it's actually the
scavenge
maximum
parts
design
from
So
junkyards.
And what we're gonna talk
yeah.
about too is
Extreme
that your
reliability.
limiting factor
Yeah.
of how
Because
powerful a jet engine
sounds
can
like the
operate
radials were just
is gonna be
overall
by
the
the
worst
temperature
I've ever been.
impinging
No.
on your turbine.
Wow.
No
Yeah.
way,
You get them too
that
high, you're gonna have to
sounds,
turbulate your engine stuff.
okay, I love the
So
PT6.
everything is based on,
But radials sound
The
weird.
radial, oh my god.
that's why there's a lot of
Do you think
advanced
radials
engineering
sound better?
into ceramics and
Yeah.
stuff like this, so that you can operate hotter and extract more energy out of the fuel,
This is backwards, yeah.
which increases the efficiency.
You guys, this is also.
Isn't it
this
cool?
is
Pretty
on-
cool.
Do you know what the end result
This
is
is
when
what
you're
this
actually
triple
operating?
seven's running.
And then you
This
start
is
taking it
on-
up to
this
full
is
power.
So you're running, this would be your running traction. Yes. You're correct. Okay, I get it. No, you don't. It's okay.
This is probably one of the best things that we have up here.
Yeah.
Oh, we didn't talk about the 4 either.
Oh, right. I do have later where I compare this to autocycle. So
Oh,
we
yeah,
will
okay.
go into it.
Oh, okay, good,
For
good.
sure, more
Excellent.
detail. A little bit.
I think I prefer two-stroke Detroit diesels. This is.
Nah. Get one of those little Allison 250s and mount it in your car, hook it up to a shaft.
Right, but then you basically just have full power and a clutch with a bunch of gears.
That's just
For
connected
gear
to the
all the way up to
gearbox
36 gears.
It
That'd be
depends.
fun.
It would
It can be like
Go
a
right down the
shaft
strip.
off of the
high-low differential.
like an
Semi-trucks.
Or of the gearboxes.
Well, they certainly
How
have a
does
place.
a gearbox connect to
Yeah.
one of these? Because everything here would spin.
Correct. So on a single spool engine like we're showing here, you'll have a tower shaft on some gears or some beveled gears here.
Okay.
But you have a tower shaft come down,
Interesting.
this big gearbox that hangs on the bottom of the engine.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
with starter, hydraulic pump, fuel pump. all
Sure.
that stuff.
Where all the pumps would be that need to be mechanically attached to the engine.
Exactly.
That makes
The
sense.
stators are divergent,
And that's like our beach jet.
so
is. I don't know
it
if
gets
you know that.
accelerated
It's,
between each stage. So we're compressing it and then
It's
accelerating
got
it
a
before
vertical
you
shaft
see
going
it's
back to
faster.
a bevel gear.
So it's compressing,
Wherever the
but it's
bevel gear
also
might be
getting
on that
slightly
particular
faster.
It's usually right where the gears are. And, yeah, the bevel gear goes to a shaft and then that's beveled to the whole gearbox. So when you start the starter, you're turning, you hit, you start to turn the compressor. And then once you get enough airflow,
So in that gearbox would be the then some fuel.
Exactly.
And then
And then the starter shuts off, it turns into a generator.
that's why it's a start gen.
See how it's coming together?
I love turbines. They're so cool. Suddenly, everything in electrical makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Except it doesn't.
Oh,
Staying straight.
Not with their captures. 1 hour. Now you need also change. So at the next break, I'll get ready to do it.
all right, gathering, Joe. Were there any, now we're gonna be talking a ton more about this, but any pressing questions that came up while you were away at break? You know, oh. Any compressing questions?
Remember, this is all high-level overview right now. We're gonna get into the weeds.
All good. So anybody have any thought of why we have a squid on the next slide? What does the squid have to do with turbine class?
It takes in water and shoots it.
Yes! So squid, it actually propels itself through the water by jet propulsion or jet reaction. So it takes in the water and funnels it out, and then its body goes opposite way for the reaction. Yeah, fun little tidbit. We're gonna dive into a quick drive through history. So, Mr. Hero, who's an Egyptian mathematician, came up with an Eolipale, something like that. And it's one of the earliest accounts of a reaction principle. And what he did, he filled this with water and lit a fire underneath of it and converted this water into steam, and the steam escapes out of these little ducts, which then have the reaction from this force, and it spun. So he came up with that. There's a cool model. I forget what museum this is in. Then we had Chinese rockets about AD 1200. Also reaction principle. They took some black powder, charcoal, sulfur, saltpeter, which is like potassium nitrate, exploded it, and made rockets out of it. Mr. Bronca came up with a turbine device. And this was like the first official gas turbine device. Italian engineer, and it also used steam to rotate some turbine blades, and then it was used to operate, I guess, giant stamping machine. So his was the first practical application of a steam turbine. Then Sir Isaac Newton came along, developed the horseless carriage, 1687, and also used the jet propulsion principle. And that's when he was recognizing, writing third law of motion, same principle, heating up water, steam escaping, that reaction propelling the vehicle forward. It didn't have enough power to actually be practical, but his ideas were great. What is the third law? unfortunately, but they did install the engine on the Gloucester E-28-39 aircraft. They only ever built 3, but the test flight took it to 400 miles per hour, and it was said to have 1,000 pounds of thrust. Then Heinkel came, and he was a German, and at that time they had more money, so he got the credit for the first purely jet propelled flight in history, because his came into being a little bit before Little's was considered somewhat successful. And then, of course, the British had to get on board, and they developed their jet program. They donated a copy of their jet to the U.S., and from that, they developed what was used on the P-59. Yeah, a whole interesting story of kind of back and forth between the British and the U.S. The U.S. were like, oh, we can make better stuff, but then did they steal ideas? Maybe, maybe not. After World War II, then, because during the war, obviously, all the engineering was directed into making better fighting aircraft. After the war, they're like, hey, we can use turbines on passenger, make our aircraft go higher, faster, further. And British went out again. First turboprop powered passenger liner in 1948, the Vickers Viscount. And then they developed a Comet. Anyone remember from sheet metal class what was sad about that airplane?
Was it rivets loosely within the nose?
Yeah, so they were not driving their flush rivets correctly. The metal was too thin for their head, and they were too close to the cornered windows. A bunch of things going wrong. Inspections also were not being done as they should have. So like the whole Swiss cheese model, and they started crashing, busting apart, and crashing with the structural fatigue stress. Then finally, U.S. hopped back into things. Boeing is like, we're gonna go big or go home. Invested a quarter of their net worth into the 707. That went into the service 1958. But then British said, we can do it better. We're gonna go supersonic. And they came up with the Concorde. There's actually 16 supersonic Concordes. 4 Rolls-Royce turbojet engines. This was a 100-passenger aircraft, 2.2 times the speed of sound, until things didn't go so well and they crashed and they scrapped the program. But around 2000, I think, when they crashed, within a category of jet. Yep. A reaction.
Just remember that jet has to do with that jet exhaust. How it's generated, whether it's through a turbine engine or rocket engine or force jet, it all has to do with the jet of flow and on the back that propels on the motor.
So I guess when they say the SR-71 is the fastest jet aircraft, they're kind of dumbing it down from the actual definition. We're talking about air, like air intake jet aircraft.
Yes.
Well, we call jet aircraft jets,
Right.
but we also call the actual fluid flow going on the tailpipe jet exhaust. So it's jet of fluid coming out of that. We can call air a fluid.
Mhm.
This is off topic, that's a rocket aircraft. I think it's not.
I'll let you look that
For
up.
short time.
It's an aircraft and then it's a spacecraft and then hopefully it's an aircraft. So with our rockets, and a rocket engine, a rocket motor, by the way. In a rocket engine, you've got solid fuel, combustion chamber, and then when that combines, you have your jet exhaust driving that forward. Rocket motor is a little more controlled. It's liquid, and then when those are combined with the oxidizer, you have your exhaust out the back.
Can somebody give me an example of a rocket engine? Something that you might play with on the 4th of July.
Like model rockets?
Clear
And here's a diagram of what a liquid rocket motor could look like. All kinds of valves to control that flow when it mixes your fuel, when it gets combusted and all that stuff.
They forgot to swap tanks. Looks like they just drained the right tank.
No, that's a clear oxygen. Any questions on rockets? We're just hitting these. You won't really be, you're not in-depth tested at all on this stuff, but you need to know just the difference.
So does an airframe power plant work on stuff like this then?
Could you? Good. You could. Alright, ramjet. So here we have, so the rockets are non-air breathing. They have their fuel, oxygen, or oxidizer contained within themselves. Now we have an air breathing engine. Ramjet has no moving parts. And since it doesn't have any compressor to draw in the air, it has to be moving. So it has to be let off of moving aircraft or something. They'll be used on weapons delivery systems, sadly. But the air will come in and they'll come in convergent, and then what kind of duct is right there? Divergent. So we're building our pressure for our fuel and ignition, combustion to happen, and then we have exhaust out the back to propel it forward. Similar, but a little more components from a ramjet is a pulse jet. These are pretty cool. They have these little valves. So when combustion occurs, we get a buildup of pressure that closes these valves. So then our pressure goes back, and you'll hear like a shuddering action. So these are also called buzz jets. And if you wonder what one sounds like, if you hear one of these, probably don't have long for this world.
Voting absentee in Michigan is now safe and secure. Go to mi.vote to request your absentee ballot. Track your ballot online and see when it is received. Learn more at mi.vote.
I got to hear one and you're still alive.
So are these like essentially pulse jets, so they move without
No, just a weapon delivery. Because they have to be launched off something, there's no way to, they need something else to propel them upward and get the airflow going. Any questions on those? That's pretty much all that we'll talk about them. Anything to add? So now to the important one that we do like in airplanes, the gas turbine. And what are the three major components common to every gas turbine engine? Give me one. Oh my goodness, you don't wait. Okay, I heard compressor, I heard combustion. Give me one more. Excellent. Yes, compressor, combustor, turbine, and using a gaseous fluid as a working medium, producing either shaft horsepower. What kind of aircraft would that be on? Turboprop or helicopter. So we're taking the energy into a shaft, either to the rotor or prop, or jet thrust for like on our beach jet, or both. Now, what were four types of jet engines? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I got pulse. Ramjet. I heard something over here. Yep. Rocket and gas turbine. Now, of gas turbines, there are four common types. So we went from up here, jets, now we're going to turbines. Now there are four types of turbines. It is. So, we are going to talk about turbojets, turbofans, turboprops, and turboshafts. So, which one of these do you think is on the Bell 206 helicopter? Turboshaft. Excellent. Which one of these do you think is on the King Air? Turboprop. Which one of these do you think is on the beach jet? Oh! Raise your hand if you think it's a turbojet. Raise your hand if you think it's a turbofan. Ooh. I'm not going to answer. We're going to talk about it when we get to it. I'll let you ruminate on that. Okay, so first, we're going to intro turbofan because it's the best example. It gives you kind of components of all of them. And then we're going to dive into the differences between those four. So we have here what we had already talked about. Compressor, compressing down our air, and the combustion section where combustion, the burning of that fuel air mixture is happening. And then expelled back onto our turbine. The turbine extracts the energy from that combusted air. What is the job of the turbine? To turn and drive the compressor, and then out the exhaust. But on a turbofan, we have another component up here, which is the fan. So, what's really cool about turbofans, a bunch of your air is going through what's called the core of the engine, the compressor, combustor, turbine. But we have all this space out here where the air is only going through the fan and is bypassing the core of the engine. So the whole way around, we have bypass. Anyone looked at the beach jet? And what do you think your answer is? How many say it is a turbofan? The one that said they looked at the beach jet, I say it is a turbofan, and shit, it is a turbofan on the beach jet. Other questions? Yeah.
Does this operate like a jet pump where you have that small amount of accelerated air and exhaust, outside air, accelerated air as well?
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about, theory of how air travels there. So turbofans are going to be kind of classified on how much air is bypassing the core of the engine and just going through the outer fan. But we will talk about that. So here we go. Yes. Here's those four groups again. Turbojet, that's just your basic turbine. If we go back here, that's not the fan, that's just compressor, combustor, turbine. So turbojet is just a core basic turbine engine. Turbofan, now you add the fan out in the front, and we'll talk about you can have low, medium, or high bypass, depending how big your fan is compared to the core of your engine. Turbojets, turbofans are called thrust producing engines because they're just being driven forward by the thrust out the back of the engine. Then turboprops, like our fine example right there, that has a propeller on the front of the engine, or turbo shaft, where the turbine will also be driving, connected to a shaft, connected to the rotor on a helicopter, or an APU. These are called torque producing engines because they're providing a torque to drive the prop or the rotor. Do you think torque producing engines produce any thrust? Very good. A little bit. Sometimes it's almost negligible, but depends on the engine. Maybe a little. But we're harvesting the energy to drive a Excellent. And what is important about that section? Highest pressure. Yes. And then into our burner cans or combustion chamber. And it's a little hard to tell. I think they're showing you the turbines right there into a massive exhaust. All there is going through the core of that engine. Here is some cool pictures of an F4 Phantom. And this is where I have in my notes Kirk's story, if you want to share, of the F4s flying over the carrier and breaking the canopies.
Yeah, I feel sorry for that pilot. Who here saw that movie Top Gun?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, with that, the first Top Gun back in the 1980s. Didn't he say, because they were messing up, didn't that commander tell him, you're gonna fly rubber dog poop out of Hong Kong, you know, if you keep messing up? Well, I can't feel sorry for this guy. So I was on board my first carrier, USS Coral Sea, and we had F4 Phantoms as the fighter jets. They didn't quite transition, not all of them transitioned to the F-14 Tomcats yet. And then our sister carrier had F4 Phantoms. So on the carriers, we have an electronic countermeasure aircraft called the E2s, and we had the A6. A6s are small twin-engine jet that are designed with these electrical pods to like blank out cities. You know, they put out all this electromagnetic pulse for that kind of warfare. And in order to protect the pilot in that A6, they coat the canopy in gold. And if you malleate gold so thin, it becomes transparent, but it's still one piece. So what they do is they put gold in the canopy, and then of course it's shunted to the airframe, and that protects the pilot from the radiation coming off of these pods when they put all this electromagnetic pulse out to blank out cities and stuff. Well, we had some of those golden A6s parked on the aircraft carrier. The sister carrier had some hot dog pilot that did a supersonic pass with an F4 going over the carrier. And the shock wave coming off the aircraft busted a couple of those golden A6 canopies. Millions of dollars in these canopies. And so, I don't know what happened to the pilot when he got back. I don't know where they transferred him to, you know. But, yeah. So that just goes to show you the F4 was actually a faster jet than the F-14 Tomcat. The F-14 Tomcat in its day was great maneuverability, dogfighter, and stuff like this. But if you went flat out to flat out, this was a faster jet. This engine was a pure turbojet. Everything past of this aircraft, like the F-14 Tomcats, the FA-18s, and everything today, use turbofans because they're better for afterburners. You have more air bypassing the core that you can dump into the tailpipe and light for an afterburner and get a 50% increase in thrust. So, but this was a pure turbojet engine, very good at high altitude, very fast, very fuel efficient. They burned a lot of fuel. So that's my story.
So that was turbojet, and then we come to your all, of course, and my favorite, the turboprop. So I do a couple beautiful pictures. We already talked about that it is the turbine engine with a propeller attached to it somehow. And some examples of turboprop use in missions, a huge increase of use. Kiki's like, there's something missing, don't worry. So we have Samaritan's Purse represented. They actually donated this one to Pacific Mission Aviation. Pilatus PC-12, that's like what the guy has over here, but MAF has one of those. Kodiak's coming Thursday, I believe. MAF's Kodiak. This is New Tribe, so you know, our Ethno 360. engine right here, where do you think is the intake?
On the bottom.
Getting hotter. Oh,
Excellent. Hey, that's the back of the engine. What? So, PT6 is unique. It is a reverse flow engine. They're able to make it shorter. We're talking about all the details of that. But the air does come in back here. So, air comes in, and then we have what component? Compressor. And air comes down through here and does a twisty backflow, not backflow, but turn into the combustion section, turns again to go through our turbines and out the exhaust. But our turbines are driving our propeller. Another super cool fact that we'll talk more about later on the PT6. Do you think this is the guy that was drawing this didn't have enough veggies and forgot to draw a line through there? Correct. So it is a split engine. There is no connection between. This is called our compressor turbine because it's connected to our compressor. And our power turbine giving power to our propeller shaft, which runs through a whole bunch of gears because you don't want the prop spinning at the same RPM that your turbine is spinning, or you would have prop going out into space to join astronauts. So on your turbo shaft, turbo props, you're going to have a whole gearbox of reduction gearing so your prop can go at a reasonable RPM. But yeah, we have the split. It's just the energy, the design of the air coming off your compressor turbine that is driving your power turbine. Shane.
What is the benefit of a reverse flow turbine?
Shorter. Yep.
So when you
More
reverse flow
compact.
it, it can be shorter.
Yes. Fits into airframes a lot nicer. Because you have this instead of the combustion, that would be the other way, like just happening all linearly. We've got coming through reverse, like dog legging flow.
And I guess it kind of has to be a turboprop to produce torque on the front of the aircraft. That has to be the hot section in front. So they knew they had to flip it, and that actually makes a lot more sense.
So there are turboprops that are not reverse flow. The Honeywell Garrett. But the next picture shows it. But yeah. Yeah.
So with the inlet in the front of the exhaust, I mean, with the inlet in the back of the exhaust itself, is that just gonna be like recycled exhaust?
Yeah.
You're good?
What's super awesome is the Kodiak's coming Thursday, so look at it. But you can even look on our King Air. And if you look at the engine nacelle, under the prop is this giant opening, and that is the intake duct. So even though on the engine, our intake is way back here, on the airframe, you have this big old duct that does come out to the front, funnel that air to the back of the engine. And then the exhaust will be behind the intake duct on the airframe. Very good thinking.
Would that airflow, like going all the way around it, help with cooling it at all? Or is it
You mean
just solely
internally?
airflow versus-
Oh, yeah. It would, I think. There's more air also compressor is specifically used for cooling. We'll talk about. Yeah.
That lose efficiency and have the air switching directions.
The benefit of the Because, yeah, when you do swaps with air, you do lose some, but it's minimal compared to the benefits.
With the shorter engine too, you're reducing the drag on the air type.
Right. And weight. So that was your brief intro, yeah. Oh,
Do you lose energy having the compressor and turbine side connected technically?
again, if there is energy loss, it's made up for in the design. So, yeah. Any other? So, we do have to talk about Garrett example. And these are used, like I said, in the Caravan. So you could hook a propeller to the shaft, or like on the Allisons, I think you're working on them in Case's class, the shaft is used going to a rotor shaft. But here, we do have our inlet towards the front of the whole engine, then the compressor, and the combustion chamber, and exhaust. And a turbine is an inner spool that comes up here through our gearbox to the drive shaft. So that's how, on a non-free turbine, where it's all connected. That was what I meant.
Now, is this a reverse flow combustor?
Yes. So the combustor is still, yeah, doing changes to try to shorten it a little bit. Any questions on turboprop and turbo shaft where the energy is used to drive a shaft? Yeah.
So, turbo shaft, they're always connected, your turbine and your compressors. And turbo prop, you can have, I mean, you have a turbine with your compressors, but they're not always, they're not connected.
Not necessarily. These are just two examples. Like, yeah, like Garrett's, these can be used for turboprop.
Sure.
It's just how out here is connected. Yeah. If it's going to a geared to a shaft or geared to a prop.
Oh,
And then back to the turbo fan. And yeah, what we have here in front of our compressor, you can think of kind of as the first stage is the fan, and then our compressors back here going to our turbines. And we'll talk about stages of compressor and stages of turbine. But they'll have, this gets the best of both worlds from a turboprop and turbojet, where you can have good efficiency at both low and high altitudes. And I believe this will be a test question, best fuel efficiency with the best of both worlds. Interesting thing, you can have the fan
the only thing I wanted to point out.
That's
Yeah. Okay, but again,
Hey, thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
Much appreciated.
No problem. I'll be here tomorrow.
Oh, you're leaving, Kirk?
Yeah, I
Just
guess.
leaving just like that, huh?
Christina,
First I was coming.
I got a question. So for the fan, I don't know if I missed it, but what's the point of it? I don't know if you covered it already or
We
if
did
you're
it,
going-
and we will.
Oh, okay, perfect.
But there, it gives, like for our afterburner engine, it gives all this fresh air injected into the afterburner.
Wait a
A lot
minute.
of it's used for cooling.
Like cooling the
Yeah.
actual like engine itself.
Yep.
The entire, okay. And then wait, so how would the afterburner? There would be like valves here, so then
Yes.
it just shoots the cold air in, and that heats it up, and then you get the extra.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
there'd be little, ducts.
Okay. Okay. I wasn't sure if you already covered it, like I missed it or what.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay, perfect.
Very good question.
Perfect.
So the afterburner is like in that picture.
It would be, so there'd be another ring of fuel nozzle like behind the turbines.
Okay, so it's
Inject
like
more fuel.
it's an extra combustion chamber. No?
It's not designed, it's just in the exhaust.
It's just an extra.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, and that would heat up like more fuel to create
Yeah.
like hotter air.
Yeah.
Oh.
And also burning up any remaining fuel coming out of the actual combustion chamber.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're saying like some of the air could like cover, like take some of the fuel out? What?
So if there's, after it's combusted here,
Mhm.
and it goes to the turbines, sometimes if it's not a clean burn, there's still be remnants of fuel.
Oh, and then that's what these
So
would
then
be,
if-
is
yeah,
just
you-
to like
you ignite
burn
that.
it a little extra. Oh,
Need that
okay.
afterburner.
Okay.
So you're getting basically the most bang for your buck.
Yes,
Essentially is what this is.
exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
Understood.
superchargers.
But see, they steal your power.
Right. Just have more power.
Okay.
No, like the best would be the centrifugal supercharger. Uses the turbo housing. It's got a gear reduction.
Anti-air gun.
So it's still a supercharger, but it uses turbo.
Yes.
satisfying.
Yeah.
They hit you with the arm cannon over the limit.
Do we get laps today?
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Started. Goodbye, outside world. I have my windows down, so like where I am.
I don't remember. It's pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
I don't need to deal with
Yeah, you say turbo fan, I'm like, it's raining. Go roll my windows.
nah, it's not good.
No, I know.
Take the last act.
I'm glad you're teaching this class and not making me work. Thanks for teaching the class.
I know my.
Apparently so.
Yeah, right out of shell. It doesn't look that good.
It doesn't look that good.
No, I don't do that. That's on the right with me.
Oh, really?
He lied to us.
Wait, you get an email for the strongest one? Oh, I got one. There she went all the Chuck's card. What do you got there?
Alright, gather in, sit down, calm down the spring fever. I know, I have it too.
Size them.
We're missing.
Oh, Kurt's not here. Kurt and David.
Beat him up, Barb. Over the head of the broom.
Whoa.
Did you get the big stick?
No, not the big stick.
The big
Big
stick?
stick.
Oh, I
This is a little stick, by the way.
I have one even bigger.
What's the big stick?
You don't want to find it.
And carry a big stick.
I knew it.
Yes, Betty.
Alright, so talk about turbo fans. And let's sit a minute on why do we want a fan out here rather than pure jet? What are some thoughts before I tell you? We kind of mentioned it, but we did not talk in detail about it. Yes. Fuel consumption.
It's a little bit like a turboprop that contains.
Exactly, like a turboprop, but it's shrouded. I mean, did you have? Joe?
I think noise feels less.
Yeah, noise suppression.
So you asked the turbofan, right?
Yes.
Or the fan. It could act as additional cooling.
Yes, additional cooling. Excellent. Coming back to you, what is your question?
I'm just gonna say,
Answer, yes.
probably more robust as well. Like if we have stuff coming into the fan,
Ah.
it's gonna be a lot.
Like frozen chicken.
Yeah.
Sorry, like alternatives.
Back to, which one did you say? You said, I'm blanking now, which one you said? Or the
Oh,
one-
lower noise level.
Yes, yes, yes. How, why?
Well, we're not burning the air, first of all, which means we're not as fast.
So we are getting some compression and we are getting thrust off just the fan. So additional thrust, grabbing lots more air, so now our engine becomes much more efficient at low altitude. We're not just relying on this little compressor, baby. We got we gotta keep going somehow. We got our big fan taking big bites of air. Questions on why we put a fan on the front of ours? Yeah.
When you do the air coming on the outside, you said when you turn the turboprop, you're not producing that much exhaust thrust. Does this produce more fan thrust, or does this produce more exhaust thrust? The turbofan.
So we'll talk about that. But yes, you're getting your primary thrust from your exhaust. But depending on the fan, you're also getting a significant amount from the fan. And it would depend on the size of the fan, the thrust. Yeah.
By your definition of a jet, which is air velocity of airstream or fluid expelled through a nozzle or opening, wouldn't a ducted fan fall into that category?
We'll talk about those.
Okay.
Yep. There are definitely fans, yes. So Neil, we're going to dive into definitions. On this slide, I have the definitions written out. On the next slide, I have a picture of a turbofan with all of these ratios shown on the picture. So if you like words, this slide is for you. If you're like me and like pictures, the next slide will go into more explanation. So 3 ratios you need to be familiar with when it comes to turbofans is thrust ratio. So that is a comparison of what we were talking about, the thrust produced just by the fan compared to the thrust produced by the engine core exhaust. We're comparing fan thrust to core thrust. Then bypass ratio is the ratio of incoming air that bypasses the core, so just the air that goes through the fan and out, compared to air that goes through the inner fan and through the core of the engine. And then fan pressure ratio, so that's pressure of the air back here leaving the fan compared to pressure of the air before it goes through the fan. So there's your words. Here's your picture. So pressure ratio, the air back here is going to have been compressed by the fan. So it's going to have a higher pressure, you sure hope so, back behind the fan as compared to just this ambient air at the inlet. So pressure ratio, pressure after the fan compared to pressure in front of the fan. And then bypass ratio, air that's bypassing the core, just having a happy time outside, just through the fan, compared to core air going through our compressor, getting get a significant amount of thrust just from the fan. I don't know if I mentioned, I think somebody did a lot better fuel efficiency. Cause you're not burning this air. You're just burning the core air, so much better fuel efficiency. Probably is one of the primary ones. Any other questions? So, since we have turbofans, and the fans will be different sizes on different engines, we have different bypass ratios. So, these make sense. Low, medium, high. Low is going to be just a 1-to-1 ratio. So, equal amount of air bypassing to amount of air going through the core. So, we have 50 pounds of air going around, 50 pounds of air is going through. So 1-to-1, they are equal amounts. Then as our fan gets bigger and more air is bypassing, now we have 2 parts going around compared to every 1 part, or up to 3-to-1. And then our massive high bypass, like 747, massive engines, can be 4-to-1 or even higher, where we have 4 times the amount of air going around the engine compared to air going through the core. And you can see on here, here's a freebie. Which one of these do you think our beach jet is? Try just eyeballing it when you're out there. We've got maybe got some lows. It is a low bypass. It's just a 1-to-1. It just has a little fan compared to. But those are good guesses. Very good guesses. But the outside nacelle does go the whole way back to the exhaust. So that it's a whole completely ducted fan flow that's ducted the whole way along the engine. Some big ones, the duct will only go part way back. It won't take that fan air. It'll have done whatever it needs to have done. By this point, they'll have, if they need to harvest off any for cooling or anything. And then it's just thrust after this point. So some ducts will be just partial. Questions on those 3 categories of fan bypass? So a low bypass, you can also have just a partial duct on a low bypass, or more common is fully ducted the whole way back to exhaust. A full fan duct reduces drag. Also better noise reduction, and you have cooling the whole way back along the engine. So, not fully ducted, not very common, because it just doesn't do the best thing. So maybe old engines you might see this, but for low bypass, you'll see fully ducted engines. And on these, on turbofans, think of it as a giant vacuum cleaner, sucking up all the air it possibly can. And when we talk about engines, jet engines, turbine engines, air is pounds in air. Also, thrust on the back of the engine is going to need to be measured in pounds as well. So kind of for the rest of the class, if you think about it, if this helps you, this funny little thought, that if you take a bathroom scale, don't do this, but if you take a bathroom scale and go and hold it up behind that engine, and now it's reading a certain amount of pounds, because that thrust is coming out the back of the engine, so pounds of thrust is how we measure that.
Where's that measured at?
Usually, like, right, it'll depend what kind of test they're doing. If they say, oh, we're measuring this many feet behind, or wherever they can place the sensors that the sensors survive. But yeah, they have textiles and everything for that. So, we were talking about spools of an engine. So here is an example of a high bypass, which would be, what would the ratio be for it to be considered high bypass? 4:1 or greater if you got super massive. It'll have higher propulsive efficiency, better fuel economy, and the fan is considered the first stage of the compressor. So this is showing you what we're talking about, a split spool. So in here is our second, maybe third stage compressor, because you can have 2 or 3 stages. So this is going to be a spool or a shaft, and our compressor or fan is connected here, spinny spinny. Turbine, most apt turbine is connected here. Turbine is driving our fan or first stage compressor. And then around this, I should have grabbed a tube, but it'd be basically a tube around this shaft is riding on bearings, this inner compressor, and turbine driving this compressor. So this one is moving around this longer one that goes out to first stage compressor, or low pressure compressor, because our pressure is building. This is our high pressure compressor. So then what would this turbine be considered? It's still like, so I think I might actually have a better slide of this. But if we have our N1 compressor, N2 compressor, it's going to be, the turbine will be labeled according to its compressor. So a high pressure compressor, high pressure turbine, low pressure compressor, low pressure turbine. I'll just intro that now. We'll talk more about it later. But if you think of it in order of the compressors as you come into the engine, outermost are connected, innermost are connected, and then you can have a third one.
So as going out with the turbine section, it's divergent, so it's like reciprocal. So
Correct.
it's the opposite of what the compressor section would be. The compressor section, like the way you.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. What is? Oh, yes.
Are those typically counter-rotating?
Not typically. They'll be the same. Yeah. Just so that your airflow is axial and has 1.5 to 1 fan pressure ratio, so we're boosting that 1.5. High bypass fans, pressure ratio can be as high as 7 to 1. So we're getting our air compressed 7 times more than what it is coming into the front of the fan because we have big old blades on our fan. Questions on fan pressure ratio, aspect ratio? Here's a fun little wild card. Unducted fans. Doesn't really fit in any category. We'll talk about these a little more detail in propellers class. Because these are is it a propeller or is it a fan? We don't really know. So I talk about it here, we talk about it props. There was an old one, I think in the 90s maybe, they tried it. Wasn't great. There's some new designs happening right now, trying to make a comeback with it. The idea is it would have a much higher efficiency than just a turbofan, but it would be considered an ultra high bypass fan because you have all this air going through the fan, bypassing the core. Also call it unducted fan because it does not have any kind of cowling around it. But then they're calling them propeller blades made of composites. What they tested was 12 to 15 foot diameter on these guys. Massive. And the bypass was getting fuel efficiency 15 to 20% better than non-unducted fans. And they were getting 30 to 1 bypass ratio. Wild. But they were also having trouble with blades not being ducted and a lot of other issues. So it's in the works. Maybe in the next couple years we'll see them try it again. So just be aware it's out there. We'll talk about some other fun facts in props class, since maybe it's a prop, maybe it's a fan. So I talked a bunch today about turbines. Why are they cool? But why, or how would you go about selecting a power plant? Recip versus turbine. So it's going to depend on cruise speed requirements and specialized use of the aircraft. So for today's light aircraft, like some of us have fun flying around at less than 250 miles per hour, low and slow, enjoy the scenery type of flights. A reciprocating engine, sadly, will be a better choice. Because unfortunately, it is lower cost. Costs less to buy it. These things are crazy expensive. Ryan calls them a sheet metal engine, but if anything goes wrong, extremely expensive, much more expensive than a reciprocating engine. So when it's Joe Schmo wanting to fly around, recip is much more cost effective. However, these turbines have a fantastic weight to power ratio, a lot of power for a much lighter weight. So The example, the TPE 331 weighs only 360 pounds, but produces 1,040 shaft horsepower for a 2.8 to 1 power to weight ratio. So light but powerful. They're frustrating.
What, how come the turbine jets are so, like, expensive? Cause it just seems less parts than a ship.
Is what they're made of. And the heat they have to take out, we'll talk about it, but extremely expensive sheet metal. Some may have titanium parts, but they have way tighter tolerances than reciprocating engines. The reciprocating engine is like boom boom, I had this how in a heyday. Where the air flows, you can even see on the PT6. The fuel controls extremely tight tolerances, so it takes extremely high engineering to manufacture the parts. So that's why they're a lot more expensive.
Is there less vibration with the turbine than you said?
Yes. Yeah. They're just like, wah, instead of blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And you'll see, those of you that get if you get a Kodiak ride, just take note of that, because they'll start up and it's just like super smooth stuff. That wasn't exaggerated at all. Okay. So then, for turbojet and turbofan, from 450 mile per hour on up, turbojet, turbofan are most widely used. Turbofan, in the great scheme of time, is considered newer, and it is definitely most popular for commercial and business jets, even now for fighter military jets. Turbojet is less efficient because it doesn't have that fan, has pretty much been replaced by turbofan. So if you don't have turboprop, turbofan is where it's at. Yes?
What's the highest speed then you use a turbofan and jet at?
How fast did the Blackbird go? I forget. Beyond the speed of sound. Now you have to have special inlets to slow down the air, so your engine is actually getting subsonic air. But the aircraft themselves, yeah. Next break, somebody looked up.
2193 spelled it out.
Say again?
2193.
What Mach?
3.3.
3.3. So here is a little hard to see. Just a comparison. Up here we have our piston engine. Here is increase in airspeed and thrust. So at startup, piston wins the day. It can kick out power. But then it pretty quickly drops off the faster we go, because it can't sustain that. Our turboprop comes here, he does pretty decent, but as we get faster and faster and faster, can't sustain that. Turbojet is not great at low speeds, but as we get faster and faster, we get tons of ram air. Then it actually, at the end of the day, wins out at highest airspeed. But turbofan, better than turbojet at lower speeds, and stays pretty steady. Just at the very, very end is it beat out by turbojet. So it just gives you a comparison that our turbofan is going to be the best of all the world's overall average. Here is something that you will be tested on. They like to ask this question of a turboprop versus a turbofan. So think of it, our turboprop taking a ginormous bite of air. We've got all this mass of the blades out there, pumping the air, pulling the aircraft turbo fan, or even a turbojet, you have a smaller amount of air, but a much greater acceleration to the air. So as you're moving through, you're not impinging yourself on as much air, but your fan blades or even the compressor blades are going to be able to move way faster than our prop. Why is that? Yes.
What's the best way to describe it would be having shower tracking an apple and 3 buttons to your seats.
That's good. Randall.
Our blades then are limited by the speed of the tip of the blade, because the smaller ones go.
Exactly. So the longer your blades are, the faster the tip is moving. And if these tips, they are limited by the speed of sound. Because what happens, boom, when you hit the speed of sound? Physics reverses. Not quite. But all your aerodynamic, everything is reversing, and your efficiency, boom, plummets. So you're limited by, you can't have the tips of these blades going to speed of sound. So since these are big and long, our revolutions per minute is reduced, where these are shorter, so we can spin them a lot faster until that tip hits the speed of sound. And just for a nice visual of our prop taking a large mass of air, there you go. Here's our prop disc, gobbling up all the air. Our engine core is about like that. Power output. Again, a reminder, it's a reaction engine, so it's producing power by the force of reaction. And thrust is measured in pounds. If you remember that scale at the back, don't do it, but you can picture it. So remember that jet engine power output is rated in pounds of thrust. And that rating will be determined by the manufacturer. They stick the engine in a special test cell, and then they determine where their sensors can survive. They calculate all of that at manufacturer.
Would that be the same amount of force as just how much force the jet? Like say for the sensors, you're sensing how much the jet wants to move forward?
Yes. Or
They
yes,
don't
how
have
much
sensors
stress
on
is
the same-
put on the mounts. Yep. Yep. Turbine versus piston. The largest piston ever produced was the R4360, 28-cylinder radial, which developed 4,000 shaft horsepower, versus JT9 Delta engine on the Boeing 747. 4 engines on the 747 produced 230,000 pounds of static thrust. If we yada yada yada, accept the conversion of 2.5 pounds of thrust per shaft horsepower, the propeller static thrust of the R4360 would be approximately 10,000 pounds. Thus, the Boeing 747 would need 23 of these engines to equal 4 of these engines. There you go. That's pictures of those two compressor, combustor, turbine. Very good. For this section, still in chapter 1 of the textbook. We'll stay there for this section yet. And now we're going to dive more into the theory. Very exciting. You good? This is a cool glowy picture. So, here is what is happening in our turbine. The magic. There's a lot more magic. But, so we've got fuel. Fuel is cool. Fuel is fun. But just sitting in a jar, it doesn't do anything. So we have chemical energy in that fuel. And what do we do to it? And these are our fuel nozzles coming up right here. So what chamber is this right here? Combustion chamber. And missing right there is a little igniter. So we ignite that fuel and boom! Now we have heat energy. Boom. Heat energy, here's something very important. What happens when we heat a gas up? Expands. Like that. According to Mr. Boyle, and according to the truth, it expands. And now we have kinetic moving energy. That kinetic energy is funneled to what spinny boy missing component right here? Turbines. So all of that kinetic moving velocity energy whoosh, coming out the combustion chamber, we extract with our turbines spinning around, stealing that energy, and actually the energy is spinning the turbine, or is the turbine spinning the energy? Energy spinning the turbine, converting that into mechanical energy. So the gas is transformed into mechanical energy. The turbine then turns the compressor, the accessories, the free turbine, or the gearbox, the prop, maybe the rotor blade, all the fun things. And the end result is thrust. Because, according to Newton, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. But the whole principle of the turbine is taking that chemical energy in a blob of fuel and going into heat energy that expands, extract it with the turbines, converting kinetic energy into mechanical energy. Questions on that? Now we get into the fun stuff. Not yet, almost. Okay. But the Brayton cycle. Brayton cycle versus the Otto cycle. So the Brayton cycle, and Kirk had mentioned this, is the thermodynamic cycle. Anybody remember what thermodynamic means or has to do with heat? Yep, the study of heat energy. Thermodynamic cycle of operation that may be used to explain the operating principles of the gas turbine engine. So how does it work? Basically, the energy transformation cycle in a gas turbine engine, which we already mentioned, taking that chemical energy in the fuel, going into kinetic, extracting it in the turbine. Here's the fun part. The Otto cycle versus the Brayton cycle. Am I prejudiced? Yes, I am. So how many of you feel that you have a good understanding of a reciprocating engine Otto cycle? Okay, I'll briefly explain it. Hiding behind our turbine is our piston engine. I'll just use this guy up here. But should all kind of have an idea now. So we have a cylinder, and we'll have like 4, 6, 8 cylinders on it. Piston engine. Inside the cylinder is this piston. This piston moves down to draw in our air and fuel mixture. That's intake. So it's taking a breath in, breathing in the air and fuel, and then the piston comes back up. These valves are closed. It's compressing that, making high pressure in here, and right in there somewhere, our spark plug fires, lights this on fire. That knocks this, we have combustion, knocks our piston back down, and then piston comes back off to exhaust out the gases. So we've got 4 events: intake, compression, combustion, exhaust. On a piston, it's all happening within that chamber with the piston going down, up and 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 down. Gets pretty dizzy, doesn't it? So, in our turbine engine, we have compression in the compressor. And then we have, back here, intake at the front. And then compression in the compressor. And then combustion in the combustion chamber. Exhaust out the back. All of these are always happening all the time. So it is continuously happening. You don't have to cycle up and down and up and down and up and down. It is always taking in. It is always compressing. It is always combusting till you turn it off. Always having exhaust or thrust coming out the back. And it is called, does anyone remember what the other name for the Brayton cycle is? Maybe. So on this one, our pressures are massively changing. We're going from, it can be very extremely low pressure on our auto cycle up to 800 psi on our compression, depending on the engine. Here, relatively speaking, we have very little pressure changes throughout the whole engine. Now, we are compressing, getting higher pressure up to, ooh, what's that? Diffuser. What's another name? Or location? Highest pressure point. What is it the entrance to? Entrance to the combustion, or entrance to the burner, or burner entrance. And what is it the exit from? Exit of the compressor. So, exit of the compressor, entrance to the burner, entrance to the combustor, diffuser. All that means that one little place. And that is our point of highest what? Pressure. So right here is our highest pressure. But the pressure here will always be the same. Pressure here will always be the same. Pressure here. Except, as you start up, you're ramping up. But then once you're running at full speed, pressures are pretty much staying constant. So that Brayton cycle is called the constant pressure cycle, because we're not having all these drastic changes in the same chamber that we are in the auto cycle. And the highest pressure difference from intake to diffuser is on VT6 just a difference of 88 psi versus piston 800. So comparatively constant pressure. There were some questions.
You just said that the pressures are pretty similar, same compared to a reciprocating engine.
Yes. So for sure compared to a reciprocating engine. But also, like, once you're started, you're spooled up, you're running at cruise close to 100%. Pressure here is always the same. Pressure at each stage will always be the same. And the pressure difference from your lowest pressure to your highest pressure is maybe 88. So it will change some.
So when we say it's the highest pressure, but the tubular, it's not that much higher than an intake was.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. Other questions? Okay. Yes. Okay. So on page 58, 1-58 of your textbook, as a critical paragraph, you will need for your lab. I probably won't get open today, but there will be a lab question asking you to describe pressure and volume changes throughout the engine for the Brayton cycle. I'm going to talk through it now, so pay attention. If you have questions, ask them. So when you write it in your own words, to the best of your knowledge in your lab, you will hopefully get a passing grade. So on here, we don't have the actual inlet on here, Abhi, out there. Any thoughts as to what duct shape the inlet probably would be? How many say divergent? How many say convergent? Why do you say convergent?
Want to take a lot of air and put it into one spot.
So you want it to go as fast as possible? Okay. All right, any takers for divergent duct? Zachary, think about it.
I think I've seen it before.
I think you have too.
Yeah.
So why might we want a divergent duct for our inlet? Increased pressure. That's exactly right. We want to start that pressure building as soon as possible. So yes, majority, pretty much, unless you're trying to do something weird to the engine, the inlet on the airframe, engine itself, will be a divergent duct to try to build that pressure for the compressor. So, air enters ambient pressure and whatever volume it is, but then with slightly increase in pressure, decrease in volume a little bit because you're shoving this engine through the air. Now you've got this chunk of air. And then we get to our compressor. And as air is compressed, what is happening to pressure? It's increasing. And look at this. What do you think is happening to volume? Slight decrease in volume. Because we're taking that, think of a balloon. Anyway, think of a balloon. And you're compressing. As you compress, the volume gets smaller. Also, the nature of our duct, compressing, squishing that volume down. And then we get to more pressure, more pressure, more pressure, more pressure! Highest pressure right there. And what do? We make it on fire. What happens when you heat up a gas? Expansion. What? Okay, so happening to velocity through that duct? It's going to take that right out. So it has a place to go. We're directing it. So it is pretty much a constant pressure, which is part of the reason in our combustion chamber, since we have pretty much constant pressure. Now will it vary a little bit? Yeah. But theoretically, constant pressure, that's why we call this a constant pressure cycle. So then, it comes out, turbines extract that energy, they can drive the compressor, and what kind of duct is here in our exhaust? Say it? Convergent, yep, right through here, convergent. So all that leftover expanding volume pressure is doing what? I almost said it. Decreasing pressure, and that's converted to final high velocity, like letting go of the balloon out the back, propelling that forward. Equal and opposite reaction gives us thrust. Yes.
See the outer cone is convergent, but also the inner cone. It seems like there's more area as you get closer to the exhaust.
So you'd have to actually look at these cutaways. Always leave some to be desired, but it will overall. The biggest effect will be the convergent duct. But yeah, they do put some little like diverging to do some other things, and yeah, it gets its best efficiency off of that. Any questions on the constant pressure braking cycle? And you already know this, sometimes referred to as, oh, yes, I forgot that. Constant pressure, or, I think Randall has said continuous combustion, because we are continuously burning. It's not a poof, 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 like on a piston. Continuous combustion, or, there we go, constant pressure cycle. So make sure you're familiar with both of those. If it helps you, what I like to imagine is a piston engine is like constantly gasping for breath. Turbine is just like a opera singer that can sing hold a note for 5 minutes. Right. And continuing to think about the reaction engine. What's the third law of motion? Every action. Do you think there's a reason I keep repeating this? Just for my giggles. You'll probably see this again. So, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. The turbine engine, acceleration of a mass of air by the engine is the action. Forward movement of the engine and aircraft is the reaction. And shout out to my nephew. I like to think of it as maybe easy for you to think of it as firing a gun. And I have this adorable video of the first time my nephew shot a shotgun.
Whoa.
I should try this.
Turn in on you. Ready?
Two shots and no smoke. I should try this.
Turn in on you. Ready? Ready?
Two shots and no smoke.
Hello.
I was gonna give my brother a hard time for not having him lead into it a little more, but you know what?
take the bee's nest, we put it in a bucket, and we fill the bucket with water, making it more pressurized, and then we shake the bucket, and we open the cap of it, and all the bees fly out really fast.
How can they fly out if they're all waterlogged?
Bees can't get wet in this analogy.
These are all dead.
actually fish.
No, because fish don't fly. Bees
They
fly.
can't.
That's flying fish.
Or some sort of way to shrink the bucket.
I witnessed somebody be convinced that a dog was a fish.
Some don't know.
You crack me up, man.
No, they can't be. It's a dog, it's a mammal.
Have you seen a golden retriever?
Yeah,
Oh my goodness.
they're not fish.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
They're dogs. They got fur like a dog. They got the organs of a dog. They got lungs like a dog. They don't have gills. They don't have that water line thing. They don't have that fancy bladder, swim bladder. Can't live underwater. A dog is a dog.
Chris, there's like.
Is that it? Yeah, but it's huge, isn't it?
I know, he got convinced that a dog was a fish.
I'm gonna go with
Check
it.
the fish.
Go camping. Go find a nice little campground. Or you can choose down. There's gotta be a campground nearby.
Why do we keep talking to the Italians?
Because they came up with. I got one.
What they have in the
Gathering! One last 20 minutes of survival. You can do it. Just deep breath. All right. And I am going to try to confuse you at this late hour of the day, after hours of lecture, when you are in a turbine manual, when we are talking about turbine engines. What direction is airflow always assumed to be?
Left to right.
Bottom. You are correct. Unless
Otherwise specified.
otherwise specifically specified, which we have here. So they're specifically specifying in this particular specific example, the airflow is this way. Why? Because it is. So thank you. When a fluid or a gas, is a gas considered a fluid? Yes. Is supplied at a constant flow rate through a duct, the sum of the potential, or like Amanda talked about in the balloon, if you think of our pressure, that's potential energy, and velocity is our kinetic active energy, the sum of those is generally constant. So if you're going to take pressure away, then you'll have more velocity. If you take velocity, you have more pressure. So it's a give and a take. As velocity increases, then pressure decreases. As velocity decreases, pressure increases. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, but it can be converted, which is exactly what we do in our turbine engine. And temperature is affected as a result. Whenever you convert from potential to kinetic or vice versa, temperature will be affected. Randall, you're first.
If temperature, or we're losing there's multiple points on the graph.
Look at that, yeah. Cause that's talking about types of turbine blades,
Uh-huh.
which we're not to yet.
Okay.
We'll get there later. Yes, cause lots of, we're gonna talk about compressors first, cause we're exchanging velocity and pressures. Same thing happens in a turbine, exchanging velocity and pressure. And you can all, yeah, we'll talk about that when we get there.
Okay.
But it's an excellent diagram for when we're there. So, we already talked about what kind of duct is this? Diverging. And what kind of duct is this? Converging. So, velocity is doing what?
Decreasing pressures.
Decreasing. Pressure is doing what here? Increasing. And temperature is increasing. Because pressure is increasing, temperature is increasing. Remember that. And on the opposite here, pressure decreasing, velocity increasing, temperature is also decreasing. So this is used in a compressor, in a diffuser, and exhaust nozzles, using that exchange to our advantage. Here's a super cool graph of what is happening throughout the whole engine. So we'll go over this one first and then this one. So so here on the bottom is volume of air, which is going to change a little bit. And here is pressure. So even though it is considered a constant pressure, pressure does change a little bit, which this graph shows. So A is our start, and at our intake, as you go through the compressor, obviously, it's compressing, pressure energy is being added, more pressure, till we get to what point of highest pressure? Diffuser, and then a slight drop, actually, in pressure, very slight, as combustion occurs. Why do we want the pressure to go down just a little hair? Kirk mentioned it.
Doesn't go back.
Right, so you don't have backflow, so we keep going the correct direction. And now we add a whole bunch of heat energy, and we've got massive expansion, so increase in volume, but our pressure is dropping, because we are extracting that energy with the turbines. And then it goes out the exhaust, and we come back to intake. So, on the engine itself, we have velocity, temperature, and pressure. So, air inlet, we're at ambient with all three of these. And then our greatest rise of pressure is happening through our compressor up to point right there with our diffuser. Temperature is going up a little bit with compression. And velocity is actually going up a little bit because what kind of duct is this whole big duct? Converging. So that's why we are gaining a little velocity and also pressure because we are compressing that air down. Then we get to our combustion chamber, and that's where pressure, for all purposes, pretty much constant, slight drop. Almost imperceptible drop in pressure. Well, obviously temperature is going to shoot up because we are combusting. And velocity goes up a little bit until we get to the back of our combustor, which is what kind of duct? Converging. And then our velocity goes way up. Temperature starts to drop back down. Pressure, now we're extracting all that velocity with our turbines, and we go out of the exhaust. Questions on the relationship of pressure, temperature, velocity throughout the engine? So, jet engines produce thrust by accelerating an air mass to a velocity higher than the incoming air. Make sense? Yes. And second law of motion now is force is proportional to mass times acceleration. Woohoo! That should be a review from physics. Mass of air times how fast we accelerate the air equals our force or our, what's the big word we use for force out the back of the engine? Thrust. So force now is thrust. A term you need to know, gross or static thrust, is when your engine is stationary, not moving forward, locked down, the force the engine is exerting on the engine mounts. So that's our gross or static thrust. Static thrust, there we go. While it's operating, but not moving. Be familiar with this symbol. This means gross, the G for gross, and force, which in turbines, force equals thrust. So F, force, is the same as thrust, G for gross. So F, G, that's talking about gross or static, stationary thrust. You can appreciate this lovely formula that the engineers do for you, that maybe if you're going to a manufacturing facility, you could have fun with this. But it's to show you that the force or thrust equals mass airflow through the engine, so that's important. Air velocity at the exhaust and forward velocity of the engine and acceleration of gravity 32.2. So a very curious thing, theoretically. Forward velocity of the engine is subtracted from velocity at the exhaust. So mathematically, if we start moving forward, increasing airspeed, what is going to happen to our overall thrust? Go up or down? Mathematically, theoretically. It's going to go down. As this number gets bigger, our thrust actually goes down. Why do you think, theoretically, that would happen? What's a component? Yes.
I was gonna say, the movement, the aircraft moving through the air that quickly, plus the drag, of course, but,
Boom!
so it'd probably be more like drag, actually. But then also the velocity of the aircraft, it's putting out the same amount of thrust, but the velocity and the drag. I just can't think out loud why it is not producing as much force on the air going past it.
So the biggest thing is the drag. As you begin to move the aircraft forward, there's what's called ram drag, which is having negative effect. So you'll keep moving forward until you pick up ram air. And now you're shoving more air in because you're going faster and faster and you're hitting more air molecules. But there's a point where your drag is greater than your ram air, just the initial forward where the thrust, gross thrust, theoretically, actually decreases. Now, you get moving so fast, it's not even noticeable in real life, but in theory, it drops because drag is greater than your ram until your ram ramps up and takes over.
So your velocity at the exhaust does increase as your forward velocity of the engine increases, right? Or no?
We'll look at this calculation. But And then moving forward, so net thrust is the effective thrust developed by an engine during flight, taking into consideration initial momentum of air mass prior to entering the influence of the engine. Net thrust, you just N with F force for thrust, so NF is net thrust. And so this takes that same formula, going 500 miles an hour, still consuming 50 pounds a second, and we end up 878 pounds of thrust without taking into account ram air effect. So that's just to show you the formulas are lacking. Example with fan engine thrust. Some fans will mix fan and core exhaust, some keep it separate. So if it's separate, then you do a calculation of core thrust and a calculation of fan thrust, add it together, and fan thrust can be, on big high bypass engines, can be up to 80% of thrust from the engine. So you don't need to know the numbers, just know up to 80% fan thrust can be your thrust. I think that is, yes, a quick place to stop. Yeah. Yeah. Any questions on, you don't need to know the formulas, don't need to know how to calculate them, but any questions on that? Alright, look at that, 1 minute to cleanup time.
To the left.
You did it! You did it! Is anybody not alive?
We don't need to go.
I died.
Emotion.